Greetings guys, gals, non-binary pals, and welcome back to the Adventuring channel. Whether you're new here or you've been here a while, welcome. Today we're doing a wrap-up for May. For a second there I couldn't remember what month it was. Alright, that's that's where we are right now. So, I actually filmed this a couple days ago, and it was like an hour and a half long, made no sense, and was very choppy because the camera kept overheating and dying. So, I've now written out everything, and hopefully round 2 is more coherent. So, we'll get through that. I ended up reading 6 books, mostly audiobooks, incidentally, and only one that I have a physical copy of is this guy. So, we'll get into that in a little bit. I will say, ow. I will say, well, I haven't read them as such. I have been using these as research material for the botany podcast that I do. So if you're not familiar, I have a podcast called the Botany After Dark podcast that is living on the other channel that until last week was the Amazing Plant Project. So if you're subscribed to that one, that's why it's changed. If you're not, I'll leave a thing up in the iCard and down in the description so you can check it out. Last round was Foxglove. Anyway, we had some pretty high ratings for May. There was a lot happening in May to the point that I forgot what was even in May that I read. Had to go back through the TBR video to figure that out for some of it, so that was fun. We started off with The Prince and the Dressmaker by Wang, and for some of these I did vlog footage while I was reading it, so I'll insert it here. Wow, okay. This is the exact same lighting as I've been using with the camera, but it's actually clear and not fuzzy, so I might end up just having to use my phone, which is fun. So anyway, so I just finished the first book that's on my May TBR for the Asian Readathon. So it was The Prince and the Dressmaker. Really good. Really good. I'll get into that later, but strong friendships and acceptance and like both of a friend and of yourself and a romantic interest, and it's just it's great and stuff. There is a bit of an interlude of there are parts with some transphobia in there in kind of the third act, but it's relatively short and resolves itself, so you know. But yeah, kind of historical fiction, and it's just quite like that. And it's a graphic novel, and it's really cool. Ended up borrowing it from the library, and that's one that, after having borrowed it from the library, I quite want to get a physical copy so that I can read it again. So, there's that. Anyway, I will check back later. For The Prince and the Dressmaker, it's about the main character's Prince Sebastian or Lady Crystalia, depending on what they are presenting as at that time, and Francis, who is the dressmaker in the title. It's set in Paris. Don't remember what era exactly, but at the start of the Industrial Revolution, that's what it was. It's a graphic novel, a middle grade historical fiction sort of graphic novel. There's a few minor instances of transphobia discussed in there, and some pretty cool fashion options, I will say that. I would not wear most of them, but they were very cool. Francis is a rather interesting character on that one. Each of the chapters starts with a pattern piece, so I was reading it as an ebook, so I'm not sure how the pattern pieces would like fit together. If I had the physical copy, then I'd like draw them out and see if I could make something into it, not like to scale for a person, but like to see. But that's pretty cool. And it's got a character exploring their gender identity, which it's never the word gender fluid or non-binary or what have you isn't used, but Prince Sebastian, Lady Crystalia describes their relationship with gender as not feeling entirely male or female a lot of the time, so pretty cool on that one. It's a bit more light than topics of gender identity are usually approached with, admittedly, but it's a simple, fluffy story. There's a few potentially tense bits, but all around it's just good vibes. And one thing of note, really, if the art style doesn't quite jive with you, there might be an issue with you reading the text, just because that is the art style of the book. I know there's a few mangas that the stories are right, but the art is too jarring for me to actually get into it, so like totally get that if that's a thing that is an issue for you. I read it as an ebook from the library and ended up giving it 4.5 stars, just because I don't know if it was because I was reading it at a time that I wasn't feeling that great or what exactly, but it was just nice fuzzy vibes. So 4.5 on that one. And next we've got The Henna Wars by Adiba Jaigirdar, and I have some vlog footage for this one too that I'll pop in. Hey guys, so I started reading The Henna Wars yesterday, and it's really interesting from a perspective of someone who isn't familiar with Bangladeshi culture, but also just as an LGBT story. And so yeah, basically would highly recommend. There are certain triggers for like homophobia and things like that, but would highly recommend it. Alright, so this is the check-in after I finished reading The Henna Wars, and I ended up reading it in audiobook format while driving and stuff, and I will say, right, sometimes it's harder to follow an audiobook, at least for me, because if my eyes are tracking the text, sometimes it's easier to remember what the contents is. But if you're not familiar with the pronunciations for some things, having it as an audiobook can be pretty helpful, because after a few chapters, you kind of get the hang of it, at least in my case. So, on that one. For the book itself, I'm going to go more into it at the month end wrap-up and stuff. But it really goes into, I mean, obviously it's a microcosm of, you know, a one school in one location kind of story, but it also delves into racism and homophobia and how widespread both of them can be. And you know, someone who is affected by some kind of oppression, whether it be racism, sexism, homophobia, any number of things, you're more likely to have a personal reaction to it if it's someone that you know, that you individually care about, which is also something that the author goes through. And it also, in the discussion of racism and things, there's elements that I was already aware of, but being that I'm not in Ireland where it's taking place, I'm not all that familiar with Bengali culture, and admittedly would like to learn more about that. Also, before I was reading it, I saw Noria's review, or Noria's description, talking about how the book had some cultural appropriation mentions in it, and yeah, that one's tackled in a big way, and character growth and stuff, so awesome. Also, admittedly, part of why it's taking a bit longer is the last couple of days, my brain's been a bit more fuzzy than usual, and when that happens, reading text is rather more difficult than it really needs to be. So, that's fun. But the audio formats have helped. So it follows the main characters Nishat and Flavia, who are students at a Catholic school in Ireland. They used to go to the same school and are reunited after several years apart. And so it's set in Ireland, but it's seen through a Bengali lens because Nishat and her family are Bengali. It's YA contemporary, and there's discussions of racism and stereotypes toward all of the BIPOC characters. So there's discussions where the Bengali characters are seen as unclean, or the restaurant that Nishat's family runs, one of the characters spreads a rumor that you shouldn't eat there because it causes indigestion, and Flavia is both black and Brazilian, and at one point she's talking about her experience as a Brazilian woman and how she's more sexualized because she's Brazilian and biracial on top of it, not feeling like she's fitting into either side of her family. And there's a sapphic romance in there, and discussions of homophobia because A, they're a Catholic school in Ireland, and B, at one point, Nishat is reflecting on her own identity and how if she was back home in Bangladesh, people could be killed for being gay. And there's a lot of like internal conflict there too. And there's some cultural appropriation because Nishat is a very talented henna artist, and Flavia is a talented artist and sees the henna designs and essentially literally appropriates the art, the style for her own use, for a competition situation, which is how we get the title, the Henna Wars. So there's a lot of conflict happening in there, and discussions of what it means to have a particular identity and have something be so intrinsic to who you are as a person, whether it's an individual thing or a cultural thing. I haven't read anything that's like this, and I really want to read more from her now. It wasn't an easy book to read, exactly, just because there are a lot of potentially heavy topics discussed, and sometimes, at least for me, when it's like the heavier sort of discussions, I need to kind of sit with it for a bit, and that's one of the stories. So I listened to an audiobook from the library via the Libby app, like most of these were, honestly, and gave it 4 stars. So the next one we've got is Sorcerer to the Crown by Zen Cho, and I know it's the first half of a duology, and I have the second part available on Libby right now, but I haven't listened to it yet. So I have some vlog footage for this one too. I've been listening to the audiobook for Zen Cho's Sorcerer to the Crown for the last couple hours, and it's an interesting historical fiction, historical fantasy. Just a content warning that there's a lot of very blatant racism and sexism in there. It's addressed directly because it's impacting the main characters, and it's addressed as something that is fully erroneous in the society that they're in and stuff, and unfounded. So, positives on that. But I'm like, I think 2 hours into the 14-hour book, so don't know what the rest of it's gonna be like, but it sounds interesting so far. There's like magic and fairies and stuff, so sounds good so far. I still need to start on World of Wonders, and I'm probably not going to get to Wicked Fox this month, just because. If you've seen one of the last videos that I put up on the Adventuring channel, I'll link it up in whichever corner it is. This month hasn't been that great on the mental health front, so having audiobooks helps because I don't have to like physically track the words on the page, the screen, or anything. And I don't currently have access to an audio form of either of them, so we'll see if that changes in the next couple weeks. Alright, so I haven't had a chance to listen to any more of the Sorcerer to the Crown book, but I was thinking about it, and from some of the descriptions that I've heard people talk about the book with, they've said that there's queer themes in the story, which I'm only 17% in as of yet, but I haven't seen those exactly. However, I am noticing that it doesn't, at present at least, it doesn't seem to really apply to the men in the story, but they seem to be using, well, okay, so there's a lot of racism and sexism present in the storyline so far, but it's portrayed in a way that you, the audience, knows that there's issues in the world that's being discussed. And the characters acknowledge that there's issues in the world that's being discussed. And it seems like, at least, the presence of magic in this universe might have some kind of overlap or be an indicator of or a coding for queer identity, maybe. So the girls' school, at least the one that has made an appearance, the girls are being taught that women aren't meant to have magic, and if women have magic, then it's somehow a blatantly negative thing, and will bring ruin upon the family and all friends, and yada yada. And the characters are then taught that the only way to deal with any of it is to suppress it and push it down and shackle it so that it doesn't infringe on their marriageable options, their potentiality to be married off. So it follows our main character's Zacharias' wife, who's the newly minted Sorcerer Royal of the Unnatural Philosophers Guild. Yeah. Or Unnatural Philosophers. And Prunella Gentleman. And there was a lot. It's one of those that on first reading it, right, first listening to the audio, there's some really dense parts and there's some really not so dense parts, and then after thinking about it for a bit, we just talk. Okay. So it's set in Regency period, kind of alternative reality England. And so it's a historical fiction, fantasy kind of situation. Because magic and fairies and things of that nature. Now, in this, magic is a limited resource because the Fae stopped the flow of magic into England. I won't say why, because that's part of the plot that moves things along, but that's the setup. And so we've got discussions of racism, sexism, all kinds of things. Because Zacharias is black, and every BIPOC character in the story is, because it's set in Regency period England, anyone who is not white, so any person of color, is seen as other. And those seen as other are also often seen as less than. So we've got Zacharias, who is black, and we've got Prunella, who she's brown. And alright, let's try this again. So basically the camera battery died, so I'm very glad that the dummy battery that I've got seems to be working, because that's what we're on now. So, incidentally, it's only the second time that I've tried to use it. The first one being the former attempt to record this. So, moving on. Alright, so we've got Zacharias, who's black, Prunella, who is brown, and consistently characters who are seen as less than or less human by other people in the society that they're in take it as, if not a personal challenge to kind of overturn that mindset, then at least wanting to do the best that they can for themselves. Also, with the racism, part of the issue for Zacharias is that he has a lot of conflicted feelings towards the former Sorcerer Royal, who was his father figure, mostly because, on top of certain other plot devices, when we meet Zacharias, he's an enslaved person who had been purchased as an infant by said former Sorcerer Royal, who I can't remember his name, but the previous wife, because he'd been for some reason in contact with a slave ship in the Caribbean. And throughout it, he kind of goes through an internal conflict between having affection for his former father figure / at one time enslaver, and wondering why, if he was going to bring an infant back to England, why not bring back his parents too? And I know it's part one of a duology, and there's a lot that is set up for part two. I have not read it yet. I don't know what would be in there, but at one point, Prunella suggests that Zacharias try and find his parents. It would be interesting to see that play out in the second one. I know it's already released. As I said, I already have it queued up on here. No idea if that's going to be a thing, but we'll see what happens. And with the discussions of sexism, women aren't allowed to do magic because it would be too taxing on their frail frames. But women who are in servant positions are okay to do magic because it benefits their employers. And Prunella has magic because it's an innate thing for some folks, and either she has to fully suppress her magical abilities or continue life as a servant, essentially. Because A, she's not white, and B, she's female and able to do magic. So, but all in all, there's some very thought-provoking content. Looking forward to part two on that one. I listened to it as an audiobook from the library via Libby and ended up giving it 4 stars. Next we've got World of Wonders by Ami Nozukumadel. I don't have any more vlog footage, so it's just present day me that you get. So World of Wonders follows Ami's life because it's a nonfiction memoir, but being that she's always been really interested in the natural world and wildlife and plants and humans' relationship to other beings and everything, she approaches writing a memoir through the lens of plants and animals that she's interacted with. So, lessons from nature, essentially. So, each chapter starts with an illustration of what that chapter is discussing. Has a little bit of science, has maybe a story of her interaction with that particular being, and then what that interaction taught her, and a further narrative on how it was applied in her life, with like sometimes some more science sprinkled in to the rest of it, which honestly I really appreciate, because if you're new here, we do science and art and books and plants and things around here, so was very, very up my alley with that. Yeah. It's also a very short read, and she's talking about the impacts of racism on her family, because she is half Malay Indian and half Filipino, and how growing up in the US as a biracial woman impacted how she interacted with the rest of society, how the rest of society treated her and her family, and sometimes not feeling like she fit in because she's biracial and also a person of color. And there's a couple of stories of going to visit her grandparents in India and the kind of cultural differences there. Also, just the thing, right? There's certain points when you're reading someone's story and you go, I would do that. Definitely, yeah. There's one about halfway through, right, where she's talking about how she uses, or used, the corpse flower as a filtering mechanism, shall we say, for potential suitors. Because, it's called the corpse flower for a reason, because that's what it smells like, because it's pollinated by carrion seeking insects and things. It's just funny because just talking about it and like, yeah, so in order to weed out people who I really just would not get along with, I would just start talking about how I go around the country, or like just go around wherever really, looking for corpse flowers in bloom, and like whenever she's asked like what her hobby is and stuff, and based on the person's response, that would tell her whether or not they would get another date. And apparently the only one who was actually intrigued and not completely disgusted is the guy she's with now, which, fair. That, yeah, so for the duration of the essay collection, she goes through her life and what she's learned from nature and what she's learned from the people around her, and how that impacts how she interacts with nature and the people around her. And this is her first prose work, but she's pretty well known as a poet, and the writing style has a certain lyricism to it that you can kind of tell that she's got at least a poetry background, and it's very nice to read or listen to, because she's the one that did the audiobook too, so very cool, much recommend. So I ended up giving World of Wonders 4.5 stars. So the next one is Braiding Sweetgrass, which is incidentally the only one I actually have a physical copy for. You can tell there's a lot of interesting bits in here, you know. So it was written by Dr. Robin Wall Kimmerer, and this was actually the last Botany Book Club pick, which, if you are not familiar with the Botany Book Club, I have the VODs saved, and I will be uploading them shortly. I just need to edit them down for both Thus Spoke the Plant and Braiding Sweetgrass. But basically on Mondays at 4 p.m. PST or GMT -8, we get together and talk about whichever current book we're working on. I'm not going into a full in-depth review of this one at the moment, but it's basically a nonfiction collection of essays using discussions of nature and the interaction of botany and indigenous identity to tell the narratives that she's working with. There's discussions of residential schools and the impact of them on generations of people, entire families, entire cultures losing so much of their identity, and I will definitely be researching more into that. There's also discussions of colonialism and its impacts. I ended up listening to the audiobook format and reading the text. She narrates it, which is cool, and I ended up giving it 4 stars. So yeah, would recommend on that one. And then the last one that I read was Before We Disappear by Shaun Hutchinson. It was an audiobook e-arc from NetGalley. It's a YA historical fiction, magical realism / fiction with some fantasy elements kind of story, following the main characters Jack Nevin and Wilhelm. Both are magician's assistants, but, well, Jack has sleight of hand, Will has other things at his disposal. It very deliberately disregards certain historical aspects, specifically regarding homophobia and, to a degree, racism and sexism, kind of using a modern lens and showing 1909 through that, because he was writing it during the Panini last year, and instead of making the characters go through the pain associated with attempting to have an open queer relationship in that time period, he wanted them to be able to just be happy, which I appreciate, just something to know going in. And there are a lot of good fluffy parts, mostly in the latter half of the book. So, just a content warning, there's a lot of trauma in the first half, especially regarding Will. There's discussions of abuse, being medicated, quote unquote, and kidnapping at the hands of a parental-esque sort of figure. It's addressed and called out by the other characters, but just so you know that it is in there. And there was apparently an odd discussion about corsets being instruments of oppression in there, in conjunction with the sexism comments and stuff. I don't remember it exactly being in there, but another reviewer noted it, and I know that's a point of contention for a lot of folks. So, as said, it was an audiobook e-arc. This one's not coming out until September, so I ended up giving it 3.75 4 stars, and it is one that I would like to read the physical copy of when it gets published. So anyway, that's it for this. I don't know if I'm gonna do a TBR for June exactly or not. I've got some other videos coming up shortish, but that's all for today. Let me know in the comments down below what your best and worst reads for May were. And if you have anything that you're looking forward to for June. So, yeah, there's a couple that I'm looking forward to getting into as June progresses. So, without further ado, I will let y'all go. See you later. Remember to check the description for all my social media links. If you want to see more of what I post, hit the subscribe button down below and the bell icon next to it so you're notified when I upload. And links to the Twitch where we do Botany Book Club on Mondays are down there too, along with links for ways to help out with current global crises occurring. And yeah, I will see y'all later. Have a good one. Till next time. Take care, everybody.